Okay, so today we're going over solving absolute value inequalities. Remember when we solved inequalities before and we had absolute value equations, and we said that the absolute value is the distance from zero? Well, today we're looking at absolute value inequalities. So number one is the absolute value is greater than 3. That means you must be more than 3 units from 0. Right? So if you are more than 3 units of 0, where must you be standing? So think about some numbers that are more than 3 units from 0. Well, wouldn't you have to be standing at 4 or 5 or 6 or 7? So aren't all these numbers to the right of 3 more than 3 units from 0? And isn't -4, -5, -6, -7, -8, etc.? Aren't all of these also more than 3 units from 0? And then you might be looking at it and say, wait a minute, doesn't that look like a compound OR type graph? It is a compound OR type graph. We just got done doing those. So how do we write that, what we see? So let's write the compound sentence that matches that. So we're going to say all the numbers that are to the left or less than -3, or, right, got to have the or in there, or all the numbers that are to the right or greater than +3. And this is all the numbers that are going to be more than 3 units from 0. It matches that graph. Now let's look at number 2. Number 2 says the absolute value is less than 5. So we have to be less than 5 units from 0. So less than 5 units from 0. So if I say you better be less than 5 units from 0, you're going to get into trouble. Where do you think you have to stand? Well, less than 5 units means you have to be at 4 or 3 or 2 or 1, etc., or 4.9999999. So you have to be less than 5 units. And couldn't you also be at -4, -3, -2, -1, or -4.9999999, right? So you have to be basically in between. You have to be in between -5 and 5. And then you might be saying, well, wait a minute. We just did those graphs. Isn't this graph called a compound and type graph, right? And that we call that a between statement. So we're going to write the sentence that matches that graph. So we're going to say all the numbers that are between -5 and 5. And that's how you write the compound sentence. So these are all the numbers that are less than 5 units from 0. That matches that graph. Okay, steps to solving an absolute value inequality. Step 1, isolate the absolute value inequality. 2, check for special cases. Now there are more special cases, but we're just going to look at the ones that are negative. So we're only going to look at the ones that are negative. In Algebra 2, there are some more special cases with 0, and those get a little bit tricky, and so we're just going to have you keep your eyes out for the special cases with the negatives. So if you have a greater than or equal to symbol, it's all real numbers. If you have a less than or equal to, it's no solution. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. So if it's not a special case, then step 3 would be to write the correct compound sentence. And notice we just talked about the correct compound sentences. So notice in example 1, we had where the distance was greater than, you had to be more than 3 units from 0, or more than 8 units from 0, or more than 10 units from 0. And didn't that result in writing a compound or? In example number 2, you had to be less than 5 units from 0, or less than 6 units from 0. And didn't that result in a compound and? Right? Just think about it logically. We'll go through it together. And then number 4, obviously, is to solve. Okay, so number 3. Remember, step 1 is to isolate. Remember, isolate means you must undo anything that's on the outside of the absolute value. So we have to undo any operations that are outside the absolute value. So that means we have to undo adding 6 by subtracting 6. Now we have to check for a special case, and I'm looking to see if this is negative. So this is not a negative distance, so therefore we're good. It's not a no solution situation. So remember, this is step 1. I just want to emphasize that step 1 is officially check, done, right? And then we checked for step 2. That wasn't a special case, didn't have a negative there. And then step 3 is to write the correct compound sentence. So let's look at this again. So isn't this saying that we have to be more than 4 units from 0? So let's just think about this using a number line for a second. So sometimes drawing the number line to help ground yourself, to make sense of it. So if we say you have to be more than 4 units from 0, where do you have to be standing? Would you be standing in between -4 and 4? Or would you have to be on the outside of -4 and 4? So think about, where would you have to be standing if you were going to be more than 4 units from 0? So hopefully you said you'd have to be standing on the outside of -4 and 4. It's hopefully what you were thinking. And so basically we just need to write, so we have to write a compound or sentence, right? Because our picture, more than 4 units, is out to the left. So we have to write out to the left of -4, and we have to out right of +4. So let me erase this, clean this up. So we have to write our compound sentence. So we have to write x minus 2 has to be to the left of -4, which means less than -4, or x minus 2, right? Because we're writing what's inside here, right? We're writing what's inside. So x minus 2 has to be to the right of +4. So to the right of +4 would be greater than 4. So remember, to the right is greater than, and to the left is less than. So we had to write 2 sentences. One that was to the left, and the second inequality was the one that was to the right. So we had to come up with a compound sentence. And then step 4 is to solve that compound sentence. So we're going to undo subtracting 2 by adding 2. Don't forget or in your final answer. And we're going to undo subtracting 2, right, by adding 2. And so this is your final answer. And then the graph that matches this answer is -2 and 6, all the numbers that are less than -2, and all the numbers that are greater than 6. So some kids will say, well, what's this other graph for? Well, this other graph really is not, it was just helping us determine, right? We were using a lot of critical thinking skills, and we were determining whether we should write a compound or whether we should write a compound and. And since it was an absolute value was greater, we had to write an or because we had to be more than 4 units from 0, so we had to write a compound or. Let's look at number 4. Number 4. Step 1 is to isolate the absolute value. So remember, isolating the absolute value means we have to undo anything that's on the outside of the absolute value. So we have to undo multiplying. Remember, that means multiply. So we undo multiplication by division. And then we have to decide whether we should write a compound and or a compound or. Well, notice it says less than 5 units. So that means we have to be less than 5 units from 0. So if we were just thinking about this, so right now we're just thinking in our head, maybe just off to the side of our paper drawing a little diagram. And if we have to be less than 5 units, right, we have to be less than 5 units from 0, are we going to be on the outside of -5 and +5? Or are we going to be on the inside of 5 and -5 if we're less than 5 units? And hopefully you said you'd have to be in between -5 and 5 to be less than 5 units. So therefore we have to write a compound and. So learning how to decide whether you should write a compound and or a compound or. So notice if it's less than, you write a compound and if it's greater than, you're going to write a compound or. So we have to write all the numbers that are in between 5 and -5. So wouldn't we say all the numbers, didn't want to use blue, all the numbers that were in between, so notice we're rewriting what's inside, and it has to be between 5 and -5. So we had to write a compound and sentence. So we're going to write the between sentence. And then we learned how to solve a between statement. So we should already know how to solve a between statement. We're going to undo subtracting 1 by adding 1. And don't forget you have to add 1 to both ends, because remember we're actually solving 2 inequalities simultaneously. You guys are always asking for shortcuts, and then we give you a shortcut and you're like, no, I don't want to do it. So that's -4, 2n. Then we have to divide everybody by 2. I'm running out of room, so I'll put it up here. And I'm not going to graph this. Maybe I'll graph this one. Wait, that should be a 6. Ooh, caught it. That should be a 3. 5 plus 1 is 6. Yeah, yep. Double check. And so your answer should be -2 and 3, and all the numbers between -2 and 3. Okay, let's go to the next page. Okay, so again, let's do a few more. So here we have isolate the absolute value, step 1. So in step 1, remember anything that's outside the absolute value, we have to undo it. So here we have 2 undos. We have to undo subtraction first. Remember, we always undo adding and subtracting first, and then we can undo the multiplication second. So we're going to undo subtracting by adding 3. And that's going to give me 1/2 x absolute value. And then we can undo multiplying by 1/2 by either dividing both sides by 1/2, or we can multiply by its reciprocal. And I like to multiply by its reciprocal. And notice step 1 is officially done. So I just want to emphasize, check. Step 1, remember, was to isolate. So notice we had to add 3 to both sides, multiply by 2 to both sides, just to get it to where step 1 was officially done. Then step 2 is to check to make sure there's no special case. So we don't have a negative distance, so therefore it's not a special case. So then step 3 is to write the correct compound sentence. So notice that this says that we must be less than 8 units from 0. So if we were just thinking, right, just thinking about this in our head, wouldn't that mean if you must be less than 8 units from 0, would you be in between -8 and 8, or would you be on the outside to the left? Or would you be on the outside of -8 and 8? If I tell you, you better be less than 8 units, can you stand at 9 units? Wouldn't 9 be more than 8 units from 0? So isn't less than 8 units from 0 in between? So therefore, don't we have to write a compound and? Because it's a less than, therefore it's going to be in between. Therefore, we have to write an and. So we're going to say that x plus 5, right, x plus 5 must be between 8 and -8. So we're just writing the sentence, but we're using x plus 5. And then we have to solve that compound and sentence. So we're going to undo adding 5 by subtracting 5. And don't forget, we have to subtract 5 to both ends. Why do we do that? Because we're solving two inequalities simultaneously. So that gives me negative 13 is less than x is less than 3. And then that would be all the numbers that would be between negative 13 and 3. Now remember, if this had been an equal to symbol, if those had been equal to symbols, wouldn't those be solid? Right? So those were not. So let's put it back to the way it should be. So remember, these are all the solutions. So this is your final answer. And these are the solutions. So if you pick any number in the shaded region and you plug it back into the original sentence, it would make it a true sentence. Okay, number 5. Number 5, isolate the absolute value. Notice that step 1 is already done. So I'm just going to emphasize, check step 1 is already done. It's already isolated. Step 2 is to check for a no solution. So I don't see a negative number, so it's not one of those special cases. No solution are potentially all real numbers, so it's not a special case because it's not negative. And then step 3 is to write the correct compound sentence. Well, notice it says that we must be more than 24 units from 0. So if we just take a moment to think off to the side of our paper, if I say you must be more than 24 units from 0, would you be in between 24 and negative 24? Or would you have to be on the outside of negative 24 and 24 if I say you got to be more than 24 units? Wouldn't you have to be out here? So therefore, don't we have to write a compound or? So we have to write two sentences. One of them has to be to the left of negative 24, and the other one has to be to the right of positive 24. So we have to say that 6x right, 6x has to be to the left, right, has to be less than negative 24, or, got to have that or in there, or 6x has to be to the greater than, right, to the right, greater than positive 24. So we were only using this to help us determine whether we should write a compound and or a compound or. So after a while, you may be off to the side of your paper, you're writing that, and then you would just write, 6x has to be to the left of negative 24, or 6x has to be to the right of positive 24. So you got to get the practice down of being able to write the correct compound sentence. And then we have to solve those compound sentences. So undo multiplication by dividing. Don't forget, if you ever multiply or divide by a negative number, don't forget we have to reverse. And so far we didn't have to use the reverse rule. And then or is part of your answer, and then we're going to divide both sides by 6 to solve this one. So if you ever multiply or divide by a negative, you have to reverse, but we did not. We divided by a positive. So the reverse rule does not take effect, and this is our final answer. And then if we want to graph that, all the numbers that are less than negative 4 and all the numbers that are greater than positive 4. Okay, let's look at number 6. Number 6. Step 1, isolate the absolute value. Notice that step 1 is already done. It's already isolated. Check. Step 2 is to look for a special case. And notice that we do have a negative, so we do have a special case. So let's do what's called sign analysis. When you take the absolute value is always the distance from 0. And the distance from 0 must always be positive. So the absolute value is always going to come out as a positive number. But on this side, we have a negative number. So is a positive number greater than a negative number? Is that always going to be true? Is that sometimes true? Just sometimes? Is that never true? So a positive greater than a negative, isn't that always true? So that means because this is always true, this is going to be all real numbers. So no matter what, it's going to make the sentence true. No matter what number you pick, it's going to make the sentence true. Let's look at, so that's called sign analysis. So let's look at problem number 7. Remember, step 1 is to isolate the absolute value. So anything on the outside of the absolute value must be isolated. So adding 9 is on the outside, so we have to undo adding 9 by subtracting 9. Step 1 is now officially done. Check. Step 2, check for a special case. Notice that we do have a negative distance, and when you have a negative distance, that doesn't make sense. But we're talking about less than now. So once again, we're going to use sign analysis. The absolute value is always going to be positive, and you have a less than a negative number on the other side. Is a positive number less than a negative number? Is that always true? Sometimes? Or never true? Isn't that never true? That's never true. That's false, right? That's never true. So that means it's no solution. So you can either write no solution. You can write the symbol. If you want to write N period, S period, I think we'd all accept that. You only have to write one of these as your answers. Okay, so those are your special cases. Okay, let's try one more. So once again, you must isolate the absolute value. So notice that we have to do 2 undo steps to isolate the absolute value. So we always undo adding and subtracting first, and then we're going to undo the multiplication or the division second. So therefore we have to add 6 to both sides. Right? We're not done with step 1 yet. Remember, we still have to undo multiplication. So we have to divide out the 3, and you have to do those one step at a time. You can't do them simultaneously. I know you guys want to cut things off. Now we are officially done with step 1. We're looking for that step 1 to be done on your paper. You can't just think about it in your head. It has to be written down on paper. It's a critical step. So we had to add 6 to both sides and divide by 3 just to get step 1 to be done, which is now isolated. Step 2, do you remember what step 2 is? Step 2 is to check to see if we have a negative distance. And since we don't have a negative distance, then it's not a special case. Step 3 is to write a compound sentence. Which compound sentence do you think we should write? Doesn't it say we have to be less than or equal to 4 units? So if you're thinking in your head as to which sentence we should write, where would you be standing if you had to be less than, right? This is less than 4 units from 0, less than or equal to 4 units. Would you be in between -4 and 4, or would you be on the outside of 4 and -4 if you're less than 4 units from 0? And hopefully you said in between, and then because there's an equal to symbol, we can actually be standing on 4 and -4. So therefore, we need to write a compound and between type statement. So we're going to write x plus 4. So x plus 4 has to be between 4 and -4. And isn't that how you write the correct between statement? Right? Doesn't that match that picture where x plus 4 has to be between? And then we're going to solve the compound and sentence by undoing adding 4, by subtracting 4. We've got a lot of 4's going on. A lot of you kept forgetting this side. Remember, we are solving two of them simultaneously. So on homework, I was seeing, and I bet other teachers were too, we're seeing you only do it to the middle and to the right side, but you didn't do it to the other side. So I was seeing that quite a bit. And then doesn't that give us -8 and 0? 0 is a real number, so don't leave that out. So doesn't that mean all the numbers between -8 and 0, and remember, because of the equal to symbol, those have to be solid. Make sure it's obviously solid. So I hope this helped a lot. Tomorrow I'll do another video of some more practice problems, so hopefully you'll understand a little bit better. Remember, you could rewind the video and stop the video, try doing the problem, and then watch the video. Have a good day.